Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here in Rome. It's very humbling to see the level of thought and creativity already in the TED conference so far. We know it's not very common to have 4 people come and speak at TED at one time, but we assure you that when our minds are combined, we are very close to equal to one normal TED speaker. We want to here today to talk about death, and death as it relates to life. 7 years ago, I was just graduating from university, and I was very, very happy to be done. I was going through a moment that I think a lot of students go through when they graduate. It's a very transitionary time in your life. And I remember looking around. I'd studied commerce in university. And I remember looking around at my peers. You know, some were going into accounting jobs, some were going into finance. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, am I ready to do this? Am I ready to jump in the next 10 or 15 years of a career? And then something happened to me that kind of changed my whole perspective and really what I thought of as important. And that was I went on a camping trip with a bunch of friends, and it was a very ordinary camping trip until the very last night when a close friend of mine, Rob, drowned accidentally. And there's that moment and kind of coming back and dealing with that in my life that changed my whole perspective and outlook on life. And, you know, I'd been exposed to death before, but I'd never realized how finite it could be, and I'd never seen it like this. And it was around that same time that the 4 of us serendipitously came together. We'd all grown up in the same small town, and we came together and started talking about life and death. And what we realized is that we were all going through similar things at the time. You know, whether that was uncertainty or levels of depression or just this desire for more from life. We felt like we were in a rut, and we needed something to shake us out of that rut. And it just so happened that that something turned out to be death.
So we knew we wanted to do something to sort of shake ourselves out of this, but we didn't know what it was. So we were having these conversations, and it was about this time that Jonnie was in English class at university, and the professor assigned him a poem called The Buried Life. And there were 4 lines in that poem that resonated with him, and he brought them back to us. And I want to share the lines of the poem right now. But often in the world's most crowded streets, but often in the din of strife, there rises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life. And he said, guys, this feeling that we're feeling that we can't articulate, this feeling of feeling buried, this guy, 150 years ago in England, talked about the same thing. And so this idea, we didn't even know what this project was. We knew we were going to call it The Buried Life. And we also knew that we needed to keep this feeling close to us. You know, the only thing that shook us out of this fog was thinking about death, and our life was finite. So how can we keep this closer to us so we didn't forget it? So we decided to ask ourselves the question, what do you want to do before you die? And we thought about it honestly, you know. We're 19-year-old kids. We were going to die soon. You know, what if we could do anything, what would it be? And so we decided to make a list of 100 things to do before you die. And then we thought, okay, you know, why don't we just go after this list? What's stopping us, you know? So we decided to hit the road for 2 weeks, one summer, before we went back to school, and go after this list. And for everything we did on our list, we were going to ask a stranger, what do you want to do before you die? And if we could help him, then we would. You know, and we just thought of anything in the world that we could do, you know? We put no limit on it. We were like, you know, everything from plant a tree to play basketball with the president to grow a mustache to pay off our parents' mortgage. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to become a Knight for a Day. This was the first thing we crossed off. But as we went through this whole experience, we went through, and what we noticed is that people wanted to help us, which we didn't expect. And people would send us their list items of things that they wanted help with. And we came back after this 2-week road trip, and we realized that this was bigger than us, you know? This poet had talked about this idea 150 years ago. People that we were talking on the streets felt buried, and they weren't doing the things they wanted to do, and so we had to keep going. And that was 6 years ago, and over the past 6 years, we crossed off, you know, 83 of our 100 list items, and we've helped a bunch of people on the way. One of the things on the list was to play basketball with the president, and, you know, one of the things was to deliver a baby, so we did that. And, you know, everything from sit down with Oprah to write a New York Times bestseller and make a TV show. And, you know, these are things that we never thought we could actually do. We just put on the list because we wanted to try. And we'd also help other people. One of the things recently was we helped a girl named Tori who was born without a hand get a bionic arm from her friends. And so, these are sort of the moments that have stuck with us when we be able to jump into someone else's life and help them do something they want to do before they die.
So, I want to tell you a story that's very close to us. We were in Dallas, Texas, and we saw a man selling his art on the street corner. And we went up to him and we said, "What do you want to do before you die?" And he looked back at us and he pulled out his wallet and he showed us a photo of a little boy. He said, "This is my son. I walked out on him 17 years ago. And before I die, I want to go and tell him why I walked out on him and that I'm sorry." And we were like, holy shit. So we got as much information as we could, and we went back. And for the next 3 months, we were just trying to track down his son. And finally, we got a hold of his roommate in college. And we called him, and he gave him his number, Laban. And then we had to make one of the hardest phone calls we've ever had to make, cold calling someone and saying, "Hey, Laban, this is the guys from Buried Life. We do a project on 100 things to do before you die. We met your father. He wants to meet you. It's his biggest dream. Would you ever want to meet him?" There was this silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, he said, "You know what? I want to meet my dad. Yeah, let's do this." So 2 weeks later, we brought Sam to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to meet his son for the first time. And we sat him down, and for the next 3 hours, they chatted back and forth and went through, and Sam had an opportunity to tell him what was going on in his life and why he walked out. That was 3 years ago. And we've been privileged enough to see them not only become friends, but actually become father and son again. They go to basketball games together. They spent the last 3 Christmases together. And the reason that I wanted to tell that story tonight is something that Sam came up to us after meeting his son for the first time at lunch. He came up to us and said, "Guys, for the past 17 years, not a day has gone past that I haven't thought about meeting my son. But I didn't do it. I was too scared." And the ability to conquer your fear and go after something is something that we hold so true. And this is a photo of them meeting for the first time in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
So the ancient Egyptians had a tradition where upon a big feast, they would bring a dead body into the room. They would have everyone look at it, and they would say, "This could be you. This will be you. So enjoy the meal that you are about to eat. Enjoy the company that you have. Enjoy the life that you have, because one day it will be gone." In doing this project over the last 8 years, the one thing I have seen again and again and again is that our culture, at least in the West, is afraid of death. Death is a taboo. Historically, sex was once taboo. Now we're more open to it, but in our day and age, I believe death is a taboo. We are afraid to think about it, maybe because it scares us, with reason. But having done this project for the last 8 years and seen what death has been, the clarity that death has given us, I think that death is actually, it shouldn't be a taboo, it should be a resource. It should be something that we think about in our culture of how to give ourselves clarity. Because when you think about death, it gives you an ultimatum. It gives you urgency, it gives you verve, it gives you passion, because you don't have a choice anymore. You know that you will one day die. When we were asked to speak here in Rome, we were very excited because we know that in Italy is known around the world as passionate people, and we've seen it hanging out with you guys. In dinner last night, we know that you take those advantages. But I think that death is something we need to start talking about more, because around the world, there's an inequality that can be fixed in the level of exposure that we have to death. So how I want to end this talk is actually not with an idea, but with a question. It's the same question that inspired us so many years ago, and it's a question for each of you here and anyone at home watching. What do you want to do before you die? Thank you so much for having us.